This program is brought to you by Emory University.
On March 16, 2015, the Center for Faculty Development and Excellence and the Office of Global Strategy and Initiatives at Emory University hosted a talk by Cate McCraw, a program officer with the Fulbright Scholar Program, titled An Introduction to Fulbright Scholar Grants for U.S. Faculty and Professionals. In Part 2 of this two-part video, Ms. McCraw covers the resources available to Fulbright Scholarship applicants, the key components of an application, and the application process itself.
Next, I'm going to talk a little bit about the many resources that are available to you as applicants. The first is the CIS website. There's a direct link to the catalog of awards from the website. There's also a great deal of information about eligibility, application requirements, review criteria. The review criteria posted on our website is the same review criteria that's sent to our peer review committees. So it's really the best way to evaluate your application prior to submission. How does my project statement and the whole application package measure up to the stated criteria on the website? I'm just going to point out here under application guidelines, we provide a checklist for you for everything that your application will include, depending on the type of grant that you're applying for. So teaching awards, for example, you have your basic online application form collecting biographical information. You have your project statement, which is 3 to 5 pages saying why Fulbright, why this country, why now, what is it exactly that you're proposing to do, either teaching or research. A tailored CV or resume. For teaching awards, you're required to submit syllabi. You have 3 reference letters. And then depending on the award, like I mentioned, some have language proficiency requirements. You may need to submit a language report or a letter of invitation, depending on the award that you're applying to. A key difference between teaching awards and research awards, for researchers, you don't need to submit syllabi, but you do need to submit a bibliography. And that's not a bibliography of your work, but rather a list of current relevant publications in your field, demonstrating that you're up to date on relevant scholarly work in the field, and it can serve as a resource for the peer reviewers when they're evaluating your application. Just a quick note about the project statement. This is one of the pieces of the application we receive the most questions about because there's a page limit of 3 to 5 pages. And people say, how do you prioritize everything you want to say about where I want to do it, why I want to do it through the Fulbright program in particular? The project statement is really the heart of the application. Can't emphasize enough how much peer reviewers really dig into the project statements. Look at the person's interest in the country, look at their interest in doing the particular grant activity, their background in the field, what brought them to a public diplomacy program rather than a standard academic exchange organization. And the project statement should really be all about what you want to do. It should be very focused on action. So it's your opportunity to introduce yourself to the peer reviewers, but there's also room for that in the resume and CV. And so we counsel applicants to try not to let your project statement become a narrative form of your resume, but really focus on what the details of your project. Give the peer reviewers as many specifics as possible. There's guidance on the website for certain questions you should answer in a project statement depending on the type of award that you're applying for. A note about the last point here, discussing adaptability and flexibility. This is something that you would want to make sure that your references address as well. But it's really important, again, it being the public diplomacy program, depending on where you're going in the world, and really anywhere you go in the world, the higher ed system in some way, shape, or form is going to look very different than the system that we have in the US. So if it's not prior experience abroad, it could be your interaction with international students on your campus here in Atlanta. How are you going to demonstrate cross-cultural sensitivity? What is your experience with cross-cultural communication? How will you adapt to a new culture in that new higher ed environment? That's something that your references should really be able to speak to as well. Often people will call and say, for references, who's the best person to write my letters of reference? I know someone who's a very prominent scholar in the field, but haven't worked with them as much directly, versus someone that you might work with every day or in your home department who can really speak to you in your academic qualifications, but also your qualities as that citizen diplomat. Talk about your collegiality, talk about your adaptability, talk about you as a person in addition to you and your role as a faculty member here. Many of the awards require a letter of invitation or at least suggest that applicants obtain one. to submit with their total application package. And a question that we receive a lot from candidates who don't already have pre-established contacts in country is, what are some ways that I can figure out where to go? How do I know which host institutions are going to be the best match for me? If you're looking to go to a country that you've never been to before, I think this is one of the pieces that applicants spend the most time on, making sure that they're looking at going to the place that's the best fit for their background and for their interests. There's a variety of resources. Depending on the award, you might see in the catalog that there is a designated contact at a university who has agreed to be kind of the point person for that kind of inquiry. So let's say I know a number of the awards in the United Kingdom. Those universities have assigned, the Fulbright University of Sheffield Award, for example. They've assigned a point person at Sheffield to field inquiries from prospective applicants. You could email that administrative contact, say, I'm in the field of art history, and that point person at Sheffield can put you in touch with faculty members in that department. So that's not the case across the board, but oftentimes in the catalog of awards, it'll give you a starting point, at least for a person to reach out to make that initial contact. The Fulbright Scholar Directory is also something that I really encourage prospective applicants to take a look at. Also taking a look at who's publishing internationally in your field, the international office on your campus. It seems like you have wonderful resources available to you here on the Emory campus for faculty development and international exchanges. And then also doing an online web search for universities in the country that you're interested in. I have worked with grantees who ended up being extremely successful in the application process and had extremely fruitful grants by starting by basically saying, okay, I'm in plant biology. What universities in Turkey have departments of plant biology? And reaching out to faculty members there and seeing what clicked. To summarize some key points about submitting a competitive application here, making sure that you review the catalog of awards carefully, consider different awards, and find an opportunity that's the best match for your interests, expertise, and background. Again, tailoring every aspect of your application to that specific award. Focusing on what you plan to do and not your biography, making sure that that project statement really discusses what you're going to do, how, and why you want to do it through Fulbright. 3 strong current letters of reference, again, from people that know you and can speak to your qualities as a person, as a citizen diplomat, and as an academic. And then again, just making sure that it's tailored to the award description. After you click submit on August 3rd this year is the deadline, the first step is that myself and other program officers at CIES will be conducting a technical review of your application, and we're just looking at eligibility and completeness. So one of the things that we flag most during tech review, as an example, there's a page limit on project statements for 3 to 5 pages, page limit on CVs of 6 pages. And we know that oftentimes for faculty, a 6-page CV could be, a sixth of the CV that you would submit in other circumstances, but making sure that you've, followed the formatting guidelines as well as content. We often catch things like page limit in tech review, and we'll send it back to the applicants and ask them to submit revised copies before we forward the application on to the peer reviewers. In September, applications move forward to discipline review. So the first stage here is that your application is going to be evaluated by a panel of experts in your field. They could have experience in numerous countries overseas, but the discipline is what they have in common. After discipline review, applications move forward to what we call regional review. This is country-based review. The panels are comprised of former Fulbrighters to the country that you're applying to. So the difference here being that in discipline review, if you're in music composition, your application is going to be, and you're applying to Georgia, your application is first going to be reviewed by a panel of experts in music, and then it's going to be reviewed by a panel of former Fulbrighters to Georgia from all academic backgrounds. The panels are rounded out so that we have representation from STEM fields, social sciences, humanities. But that's something really important to keep in mind, is that your application is going to be read by people outside your field, and that it needs to be accessible to people that aren't experts in your field. So if you're a musician, making sure that an engineer can read your application, and vice versa. If you're an engineer, making sure that someone in the humanities or social sciences can read your application and have a thorough understanding of what exactly it is that you're going to do. After the domestic peer review process, which again is discipline and regional review, applicants will be notified if they are either recommended or not recommended for further consideration. If you get a recommend letter, that means that your application is going on to step 2, which is overseas review. So it's going to be sent to the embassy or the post in the country that you're applying for, or the commission, depending on the country, as well as the Fulbright Foreign Scholarship Board, which is, again, the presidentially appointed 12-member board that governs all of Fulbright. Every single grantee, every single selection is approved by the Fulbright Foreign Scholarship Board every year. This is a step of the process where the timing really varies by country. The United Kingdom, for example, is a country that I work on. The Commission in London does phone interviews for shortlisted candidates. Not every commission does that. That's something that's unique to the UK. So that's an additional step in their review process that doesn't exist elsewhere. We have, the process just varies based on where you're applying. And so we get those selection letters out as soon as we possibly can. We work with our colleagues at State Department and overseas at the posting commissions to get notifications out. But there is variation in terms of when people are notified depending on where they applied. I'm going to spend a few minutes going through additional opportunities for U.S. scholars beyond the core program that we've talked about so far. And I'm going to start with the Fulbright Specialist Program. So unlike the Fulbright Core Program for U.S. scholars, Specialist does not fund research, but rather it's more short-term teaching or consulting opportunities. I work specifically on the core program, but work very closely with our colleagues who work on Specialist. And if there are any specialist-specific questions, I'd be happy to put you in touch with our Assistant Director of Global Programs who works on the Specialist program in particular. Specialist is different in terms of grant activity, like I said, but also grant duration. So these are 2 to 6 week grants instead of 2 to 12 months. There are 25 eligible disciplines, and where the core program is very applicant driven, you look at the catalog, you select an award that you're interested in and apply for a particular opportunity. With Specialist program, it's very institution driven. So an institution of higher ed overseas can make a request to bring a U.S. specialist to help with a short-term project. You're applying to become a member of the specialist roster. You have a roster term of 5 years, and while you're on that roster, you can be matched with project requests coming in from different countries overseas. There's also a difference in deadline because there's a rolling deadline. There are 8 peer review cycles throughout the year. It's a wonderful program we have at our office in DC. Whenever specialists, former or current specialists, are in DC for conferences, we always ask them to come do a brown bag for our staff. There's incredible diversity in the projects that people have worked on. I've seen, someone who is an expert in GPS technology working in national parks in Africa to track gorillas and other endangered species. I've seen people who were, it was requested that an expert in journalism and communications go to Thailand to develop a journalism curriculum at a university. So again, it's more consulting type work, short term. Again, a great deal of variation in terms of eligible disciplines and some very impactful projects there as well. The IEA program I'll touch on briefly is for international education administrators on campuses. I work on the France program, work closely with my colleagues who work on the others, and this is an opportunity for administrators in the field of higher ed to spend 2 weeks abroad in one of these hosting countries to go in depth about the higher ed landscape in that country. They meet with government officials, higher ed administrators, study abroad advisors, people from education nonprofits. It really varies by the award, but the idea is that administrators become acquainted with higher ed opportunities and the international ed landscape of one of these countries. If you know administrators that you think would be interested in a Fulbright opportunity, these seminars are wonderful opportunities to extend Fulbright beyond the faculty and into the administration. We've found that really wonderful partnerships have evolved as a result of having American and French or German administrators sitting at the same table together, whether it be study abroad or otherwise. And also having administrators that have completed Fulbright grants can really increase support for faculty to take leave to complete Fulbright grants as well. In particular, I just want to highlight the Outreach Lecturing Fund. Just like U.S. scholars can apply to go overseas, on Fulbright grants. International faculty members can apply to come to the U.S. to teach and conduct research. And they're an incredible resource for U.S. universities when they're here in the States. The Outreach Lecturing Fund is an initiative to get those visiting faculty members out into the American communities beyond the host institution where they're spending the majority of their time, to kind of increase the multiplier effect, the number of people that are exposed to these scholars from other countries. And I think this last slide, it's about other Fulbright U.S. Scholar programs and the student program, which is run out of IIE's office in New York.
The preceding program is copyrighted by Emory University.